Welcome back. Thank you for staying with us. Now, in an era defined by global polycrisis, from geopolitical fragmentation to economic volatility, nations are searching for resilient government or governance models. South Africa's nascent government of national unity emerges as bold, if precarious, experiment, if precisely this field. Now, by the compelling historically adversarial parties to share power and collaborate on a common minimum program, the GNU offers more than just domestic stability. It presents a potential blueprint for inclusive governance designed to navigate profound global disruption. Now, that is the view of Professor William Gumede from the Wits School of Governance, who joins us in studio to unpack this issue even more. Prof, always good to have you with us. You've argued that the GNU offers a potentially transformative model if it's genuinely inclusive. Let's speak to this issue. In your view, what are the signs so far, positive or even negative, that the GNU is delivering on this promise of inclusion?
No, good evening and good evening to your viewers, and thank you for having me here. You know, we are experiencing, at least in our generation, one of the biggest disruptions. We can almost call it a great disruption, caused by US President Donald Trump with his firstly cutting off development aids and you know, his trade tariffs. It is going to be such a shock to many country economies, and many country economies are not going to survive this. Here in South Africa, you know, we still have to face the brunt of those tariffs, but we're still sitting with our own economic crisis. So you know, we're going to have a double whammy of economic crises. Now the countries that's going to survive this disruption, global disruptions, are countries that are good governed. And the same with the firms. So the companies also, you know, if a company is not well run during this period of disruption, supply chain disruption, the company will go down. And the government of national unity, from our point of view, in our country, offers us a really good structure to navigate this disruption. Because what does it do? It brings together different political parties, different colors, different ideologies, brings together the diversity of our country to run the country. Now, when you're in a crisis, whether you're a company or whether you're a country, it is important to be inclusive and to bring diverse energy and capacity to run or to navigate the uncertainty.
Right. Let's speak about some of your ideas. Your concept of the GNU Plus, it proposes incorporating not just political parties, but also business, civil society you mentioned, and professionals into governance as well. What would a working GNU Plus model then look like in practice? And what's the risk if we don't go this route?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because of this crisis, and I say this double whammy of crisis, both a global crisis, but also a domestic political and economic crisis, we need to get all the talents of the country, all of the capacity of the country, and all the resources of the country, and all the sort of think tanks of the country to navigate this. You know, one party on its own, or a government on its own, or even one ideology is not going to deliver us, and so on. So what we now need is the GNU with all of its partners, but we now need business also, and civil society, and professionals, because we have to get the full capacity of the country to help us. For example, I mean, real examples. Let's say we negotiate, we still need to negotiate with the Trump administration, but we also have to negotiate new deals outside the US. Now, if we only take the politicians to go and negotiate, we're going to fail badly, because this is, you know, the rules of the game have changed. So what a GNU Plus negotiation would look like is the government would take business, civil society, academics, professionals, so people who understand a particular market. Whether it is a US market or whether it's a Chinese market or any other kind of market.
Let's unpack this a bit more. The current global landscape, the rising tariffs you mentioned as well, AI disruption, climate shocks, is incredibly unstable at this moment. How would inclusive consensus, if you will, a consensus-based governance better equip South Africa to really navigate these global threats that we speak of and the party-dominated rule around the world?
Yeah. So the first thing that is very, very important if for a government of national unity to work, it must be guided by the principle of always governing in the widest interest of the country, not of political parties.
Right.
That's a very, very first thing. Now, the one reason why we end up in our own domestic crisis the last 30 years is because the ANC is often, when it was a dominant party, often made decisions based on the party's interests, which is not the same as the country's interests. So if the GNU need to be successful, it must take the interests of the whole country. Then the second one would be the decisions will have to be in a partnership way. The ANC comes out of a culture where it was a dominant party, so decisions were sort of dominant decisions. So whenever the ANC make a decision, that becomes a country decision. The GNU is a new government, a multi-party government. So policies must be new, and it must bring in the non-GNU partners. Now, if we bring in a plus arrangement, a GNU plus arrangement, it then means that we now have to bring in business, civil society, and professionals to help think and help co-generate ideas and policies and even deliver. Because some parts of the state, as the state is failing so much that we can't turn it around in the next 5 years, then what we have to say, well, can business deliver this, or can the civil society deliver this?
That brings me to our next question. You've written about the importance of pragmatic thinking over ideology, something South Africa's leadership has often struggled with over the years. What are the key policy areas, Professor, where you think GNU pragmatism most urgently replaces ideological baggage?
Yeah. No, I mean, if you look at the most successful countries the last 100 years, starting off with the US, they took policy decisions from a country point of view based on pragmatism. What is pragmatism? Pragmatism is essentially you look at a context and you look at evidence and you see what works. Sometimes something will work which is that looks communist, at other times it looks capitalist. So you use whatever approaches in the moment that will work. I mean, the Chinese are doing that. So we think the Chinese Communist Party run, but the Chinese have commercial companies. So they choose what is the best. The Japanese success story came out of that. We must do the same. The last 30 years, one of the reasons why we had low growth, why we have been unable to create jobs in our country, and unable to deal with poverty, is that we haven't taken pragmatic policy approaches. So what we do, we take ideological, populist, or the great, what is called great ideas. Let's call it either just the state must deliver, knowing the state is failing. And we know there's companies that can do it, and we know there's NGOs that can do it, but we won't go there because we're ideological. So it is going to be very, very important that all policies are based on pragmatism. And the last one linked to that is also that we do policies based on consensus. So consensus means we sit together and we see what is the country's interest. And you have to remember the country's interest and a party's interest are not the same. It's almost never the same. Right? There's almost never alignment. So if consensus decision making is actually all parties come together and they say, well, this is the country's interest. Let's get a consensus on it.
Prof, a major obstacle you point is the lack of proper dispute resolution, especially inside the GNU. And also especially the clearinghouse mechanism chaired by the Deputy President, Paul Mashatile. Why has this structure failed, in your view, and how would you reform it?
All coalitions, for a coalition to work, it needs a conflict resolution, some kind of mechanism. Even if, it's not only in a political context, but even if you're on a business partnership, you have to agree beforehand how you're going to resolve conflict. Even our intimate relationship, if you're going to partner up with someone, then you have to decide beforehand, not afterwards. You have to decide, look, this is how we're going to deal with this. Now, what has happened so far, the GNU has created, but it's called a clearinghouse, but it hasn't used it up to now. It's the last time we met was in late November, and you think about all of the crises, the conflicts. There was a conflict over the budget, was available, and so on. So essentially, they created the structure, then did not use the structure. That's the first part of the structure, and then we have to look at the structure. Is it actually a practical structure? Is it an appropriate structure? I don't think it's an appropriate structure. Why is it not an appropriate structure? Because when you're in a coalition, a big coalition, then the conflict mechanism must never be chaired by the party with the most votes. You must always try to make it, to let it be chaired by the smallest party, for example, or by an outsider, like an ombudsperson. And so on. So that's the first part of it. The second thing is, if you're in a big partnership, you have to communicate, meaning the leaders of the political parties must meet almost every second week. Now, if I wonder, when did John Steenhuisen and Cyril Ramaphosa have they met? Informally, because it's very, very important that those type of conversations happens outside cabinet.
And finally, Prof, is the GNU model, especially a GNU plus, something you see as a temporary solution in crisis like what we have, or a permanent feature of South Africa's democratic evolution? I mean, could we be seeing the start of a new form of a coalition-era governance in the country?
I think the first thing is we've already arrived at the start of a new era. We're going to have coalition governments, I think, into the future. I cannot imagine that we're going to have one big dominating party again. Now, the GNUs are often used when a country is in crisis, economic crisis, or a political crisis. It's not only one crisis, we've got so many crises. Like unemployment, sky high, there's a crisis on its own, rule of law is on its own. So I think, ideally, we should keep a GNU form of government forever, because it gives us that edge of bringing all the parties together, bringing all ideologies, all colors together, and bringing the whole country's capacity together.
There must be consensus.
Yeah.
Prof, always a pleasure having you with us. That is Professor William Gumede from the Wits School of Governance. Whether the GNU becomes a new political blueprint or a failed experiment hinges not just on who governs, but how. Inclusion, consensus, and pragmatic thinking may be the only viable survival tool in an age of disruption as well.